Okay, welcome back, everybody. As we get into our next session, we're going to be talking about catalysts for faster development. We literally have the all-star team joining us next.
Nice.
Angel started out his career as the U.S. Air Force Systems Operations Specialist at Cape Canaveral, believe it or not, and specializes in SRE and DevOps engineering, has a wealth of experience in defense and federal sectors. Angel, do you want to say hello first?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm super happy to be here and excited to join in on this conversation. Security is one of my things.
Security is good. That's good. You're in the right place. You guys know Alex Williams from the New Stack. Of course, it's Alex from the New Stack, but you might also have recognized him from Read Write Web, and or TechCrunch. But come on, let's face it now. The New Stack is the big thing. And you want to say hello as well, Alex?
Hey, everyone. It's great to be here for a virtual conference. It's nice to be able to get together in this space and look forward to the discussion.
And it's a great time of the night, too, as well, for everyone involved. And finally, at the bottom right, Liran Tal, who I think's microphone might be muted, Liran, is a developer advocate at Snyk, is a member of Node.js Security Working Group, and is a JSHeroes advocate. Do you want to say hello as well, Liran? I don't think we quite hear. We see you, but I don't know that we quite hear you. So we'll make sure we get him activated as soon as we can.
Hey, everyone.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So are you guys ready to dazzle us and amaze us with talking about catalysts for faster development?
Totally.
All right. Well, I'm going to remove myself, and you are off to the races.
Hey, well, great to have you here, Angel and Liran, and for everyone out there, it's nice to have a discussion here. I have been very interested in the whole topic around DevOps for a long time, and one of the learnings that we have had in studying DevOps from a cloud-native perspective is the iterative development and how that really helped propel cloud-native technologies. And through the process of that continuous learning, the continuous iteration, there's been more and more finely granular ways to really improve processes, people, and technology. And that's really what I want to focus on, are the processes, the people, and the technology. And I'd love to look at it from a spectrum perspective. And what I mean by that is thinking about the spectrum from left to right. And I'd love to talk with you a little bit about how security is a catalyst at different phases of that spectrum, and starting way over on the left with the people who have been really on the cutting edge. Maybe they work for internet scale companies, that they're working in environments where DevOps has been something that they've maybe been done for a few years at least. How is security a catalyst for them? And then I'd like to kind of move it to the right. And in the process, I'd like to hear you talk about the people, the processes, and the technology. So Liran, maybe we can get started with you.
Sure. So I think it's an interesting point on understanding at first, guess, on what kind of teams are we looking at. I think what are we looking at? Open source projects, very dev owning their projects, or enterprises where you have more structured organizations, more structured teams, owning some of the things. So I think I can probably discuss a bit about both, but I'll start from the enterprise. I guess that's kind of maybe what is appealing to the crowd here. And I think what I've seen before is I've seen this being owned by DevOps security / DevSecOps roles, which is what I've seen on customers as well for those using the product. And what I'm thinking is they are the catalyst in terms of they want to make sure they are up in terms of compliance, in terms of scanning their depths, making sure no one does anything that is kind of out of bounds. That's an easy win. So I think that's been a lot of the catalyst that's kind of drives things, finding the solutions as they go off.
Finding the solutions as they go off. And so Angel, when you look at these very advanced teams, what do you see as what they're still trying to achieve? What are they still looking for, and what have they achieved already?
Yeah, I think actually, to kind of define, I think a catalyst, I think I'd like to talk about where things started a couple of years ago, right? Before you had this nice relationship between dev and ops, and then where did the security sit in that relationship, right? I mean, it was always, and not to disparage anyone, but the security weenies are like, sometimes on a different level, in a floor or something in the building, and those barriers were already there, and it's really impressive to see how those barriers that existed before are kind of being knocked down with the onset of DevOps and how that's all moving forward. So I think the catalyst for me, or at least defining a catalyst today, and these advanced folks, how they're operating and implementing security and everything they do, has to stem from how it used to be back in the day, right? I remember when security always came from a place of no. And it's, again, for me, it's really amazing to see how it's, flipped for the most part. Security people are now coming from a place of yes, because they have better relationships across the board, right? Not only with developers, with the operators, with the stakeholders in the business, right? So I think once you have that nice culture, percolating, that lends itself to then be able to operate and almost like a seamless, right, processes, right?
So how did those more advanced teams then find their way to be on the same floor? I mean, we hear a lot about the cultural value that comes when you have the developer teams working together with operations teams. Now with security teams, how have you seen this happen? And what are still these advanced teams trying to achieve? What is it that they're looking for? What's their quest?
Yeah, so developers, it's a funny, for me, at least when I was a developer, I didn't really think about security, to be fair. Like, back in the day, I'm talking, 25 years ago, security was the last thing on my mind. Honestly. And it took, an external, like I said, security office to kind of make sure that the stuff we were producing was compliant. But by that time, it was already too late in my mind, right? We were doing things, developing software for about a month, 2 months, and then, oh, by the way, you need to make it operate in this, lockdown fashion or whatever. But so I think there's a few elements that changed that, at least for me, and one of the biggest ones was open source, right? So when I was developing software, a lot of the libraries we were using were like proprietary. You had to pay for it, right? So most of the time, even if you had a security vulnerability, you couldn't do anything with it because you had to have the parent company that sold you that software to fix it, right? When open source came around now, right, everybody had access to this code. Now, you could actually patch whatever was broken and then, submit that up to upstream so that it could be implemented across the board. But now open source has also opened up a couple other Pandora's boxes with dependencies, right? So it's kind of same problem with the proprietary software, but now, you have to have deep knowledge of the project that you're using and even, the different layers that are included in other projects, right? So you could have like a chain of, 10 different dependencies upstream that, if you're not really deep in the code, you don't know where those things are, right? And how to fix them. So I think, my answer is open source has changed how we used to operate and also, enabled developers to be a lot more knowledgeable and have a little bit of an investment in making sure that the stuff they're producing is secure, right, from the start.
How would you illustrate that, Liran? I'm curious on your perspective on open source, because one of the issues we're running across now as open source security platforms become more widely recognized, there are some conflicts still with security professionals who are saying, yeah, we use your platform, but we can't talk about that. We're not going to discuss that. Or they might say, why are you developing this out in the open? Are those challenges that these more advanced teams face when they're trying to embrace open source, yet they're still seeing some of these tensions that come from the historical lineage of the relationship between dev and developers, ops, and security?
Well, I have seen that in a way in terms of like, I've seen like teams in largely, big organizations where they would like strict specific open source packages. So they would have a process where there's like an internal proxy inside organizations, and they would have to kind of like define a very small or like a white list of supported packages. So like there is some kind of like tension in terms of, from one hand, especially I think in JavaScript with a plethora of open source packages, you can't just go off. If you do like an npm install on some like Create React project or something like that, you'd get immediately like broken builds, because like those packages are not whitelisted, and they would have to go back to the security team and say, I need to use this, and that, and it will be a process in terms of the amount of time it will take, the security team to actually vet them to list them out to allow them. So, I mean, that's one challenge I've actually seen it in one company, like pretty large organization. But it's not like, you can use the bleeding edge of open source and do whatever you want.
Yeah, I could see that. And moving more now to to the right a little bit. I mean, I want to look at this in three phases because we don't have a ton of time. But kind of like maybe it's the middle of the spectrum here, where companies are starting to adopt, or they've established a DevOps practice internally, but they're still learning the different ways that their teams need to work together. They're learning more about microservices as the days and weeks go by. They might be thinking about cloud native architectures, such as Kubernetes. They're in it, but they're still trying to find that catalyst. And how are they finding security? How is security a catalyst for this group? Because these seem to be like the middle market right here.
Yeah, so I think one of these things is of like a catalyst is, I think, first of all, when you have those tools that are like, you can just embed them in the CI/CD, and like DevSecOps is, I don't know if to say like that's the new buzzword or the old buzzword, but that's definitely a buzzword, and people are trying to integrate that and do more of it, and like push, whatever is security into the ops. So I think we're seeing that more and more, and with the fact that everything is kind of like centered around like repository kind of like workflows, you'll also see more of those. So I think that's definitely a catalyst, and like I think you'll end up seeing and like any person on the spectrum adding those kind of integrations, whether they are devs or DevOps, trying to just add more of those CI checks and stuff like that.
So Angel, we've seen we've been discussing how security plays a role in these more advanced DevSecOps teams, and I would expect that they just find it more efficient as they may be able to just get through the security process a little bit faster, perhaps. Now, these people who are in this middle section where you see the door opening, they can see the light to some extent, right? What is the catalyst for them? And why is it security?
Right. So just going back to, I'd actually go back a little left, right? So now the way software is being developed and the tooling. So like, GitHub, right? They bought a company to actually implement security and basically, in their platform, right? So security is actually being implemented way left, right? And even in going more and more left. And to get to the middle, so it's already kind of pre-baked, right? When we're talking about the middle section. So it's becoming more and more prevalent in the beginning stages of like even designing software now. There's so many tools out there, but they weren't that great. And now that the tools are getting better and they're getting more integrated, right? And there's a lot more databases out there now. So, when I was coming up in the government, we were using NIST was a big one with their database, and then MITRE, right, combined together. Now you have companies like Snyk who actually have, I believe you're all doing your own, right? On top of all of that stuff, you're doing some assessments, right? And providing information. So the middle of this, catalyst, the catalyst for the middle, the people in the middle, it's already kind of pre-baked for them, right? So they're just accepting what's already there, and what I like to call they're grepping it through the process, right? So if you've already started on the far left and you've got a really solid, security kind of process, you just grep it on through into ops, right? And then ops is already sitting there and they're just validating it, making sure everything's in compliance, maybe in that stage. And then when you do the deploys again, you have probably some QA folks and maybe your actual security people are vetting to make sure that, hey, this stuff is in compliance and it's, within acceptable realms of status for their security checks, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to maybe throw the left part here, and I think if you look at it and like maybe throw it back to the left, I think we can talk about maybe a couple of things. So one of them is, I think with open source specifically, again, what we're seeing, at least on the NPM ecosystem, which I think is amazing for us, is, by default, when you install something, NPM will give you, a specific report of vulnerabilities. And I think this is like a really good example of like educating the community in terms of, it hasn't been there before, but now when you install something, when you do it just, as your regular, not related security, like you just said before, Angel, right? You were not thinking about security, but now when you add a package, when you add something as a dependency, you get a report. And I think like that's already an amazing step in terms of, we are now creating awareness that happens by default. So people now understand that, there's some vulnerabilities, maybe I need to take some action. So this drives, this for me is a catalyst. I'm seeing, devs, now saying, well, I have, 15,000 vulnerabilities. What do I do about it now? So now they are creating the conversation in terms of going to DevOps, going to security, asking, what are the right proper processes? What should we do about it, etc. On the other hand, it adds this challenge where, I think I've definitely seen that personally as well and experienced this with the community, and that is this challenge where maybe we are creating a lot of noise as well. So, we don't want to have this, how you have with like end-to-end, regular testing builds where if it just fails all the time, at one point, developers will start to ignore it, right? They'll just deploy to production, whatever, if all the time they get is like failures. And if every time they install a package or they do something, they just get more and more vulnerabilities, at some point, they will, go ahead and ignore it. And that's no bad for us. So I think it's a good driver, a good catalyst, but at the same time, we are seeing this challenge where, we might be adding a lot of noise. And this is, I think, where there's now an opportunity as well to figure out, can we give them, more specifically fine-grained information? Like, where is this vulnerability coming from? Is it actually exploitable? Is there a way to prioritize these vulnerabilities? A lot of things that I think, there's like a lot of room that we can improve on that part from the left, and then and then create that catalyst as like a really good, discussion maker in the organization.
So it seems like from the both of you that it's not necessarily a fact that things are not baked in. We're seeing things that are more baked in, and so we're seeing more ways to discover vulnerabilities, for example. And there's more ways to remediate the vulnerabilities. But the challenge is in prioritization, for example, and and adaptation to some extent, I would expect too.
Well, like I said, when I was coming up, right, I didn't even, if I had a security tool that was telling me, hey, you have a broken, or a vulnerable piece of software that you're, within your stack, and it gave me mitigation, information or a way to, to fix it. Yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to fix that, right? And you got to remember as well, back then we didn't really have the kind of interactions that company have today, right? Like, so B2B, right? When you're a small startup and you're working with, I tell this to startups all the time, document everything. You can document while you're doing it and get in that mode of starting to produce documents, because when you start working with a big company, a big customer, they're going to want those documents. They want to know your DR plans, your security plans. They want to know all these things that and how you handle, incidents. And with the interactions that are happening, in business, I think that those are also drivers and catalysts as well for the change, right? This mindset of, hey, even though you're a developer, you still should have this. And like I said, the tools now today are way more advanced, right? So they'll give you exactly what you need to see in order for you to go ahead and, patch along, so that when when in your processes, your software development process, move into the middle tier that we're talking about right now, which is usually, I'm assuming, operations, right? Those folks are just going to validate that, okay, those builds, maybe, you have a security type of step in your builds in the beginning as a developer, right, doing CI. One of the things I always tell people to use is Snyk, right? Just go ahead and pump it in there because it's really compatible with Circle CI. And the first step in your build should be a security scan and fail it, right? So, and if it fails, you need to do an assessment and then say, all right, well, these are acceptable. And then you can tweak the pipeline to, continue moving forward or not into that middle section for the more advanced folks who are about to deploy that software. And that's how I'm at least viewing the question, Alex. So that middle tier.
It's great. It's great. And one of the questions I have a follow up on that is, what are the tools that you're seeing that are really needed that we're not seeing yet? Like what categories of advancements in terms of tools development are people really needing now?
I think it all depends on a few things. Some of the elements are like, what type of business are you in? Are you in a regulated space? Are you in an internet space? Depending on what kind of business you're in, will dictate. If you're in the healthcare industry, you have probably it's regulated, so you have more stringent security policies versus maybe a startup that's doing API as a service or something. They may be a little bit less, they're more lax, right? So there's a couple elements, like what kind of industry you're producing software and the data that you're producing, and also and then the tools, you would have to obviously, right, find a tool that would give you the capabilities that you need to identify vulnerabilities and all the other types of information. So like you could run Snyk, and you can also run maybe Chef's Inspect, right, which is a nice combination for compliance, right? So and audits and things like that. It depends. Everyone's different in that aspect.
So go ahead, Liran, and then I'll have a last question, another question. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I was gonna just talk more about prioritization, because I think that's one key as like a really good and fast enabler as well. Like teams, get bombarded with a lot of information these days, especially around open source dependencies. I think what they need help with is prioritize. Like they get 100 more vulnerabilities using open source project. Now, which one they should start first? What is generally, just a library just being, used in the tree of, open source packages, just installed, but not actually used, right? What if is that vulnerable method is being, invoked, or is it not? So to be able to like prioritize it, right? I think that is an area where we're going to see a lot of improvement coming up, I think in the following years, for sure.
Fascinating. Okay, so we're going to move a little bit further over to the right. And this is a group that I expect we're seeing a lot of these days. Unfortunately, we're in a situation around the world where everyone has to stay home, and it's changing business everywhere. It's changing our lives. It's changing everything. And we see it here in the United States in particular, for instance, with how the federal government is keeping up with unemployment, with their unemployment systems, right? They're quite outdated. And it's very true, I think, as well for large organizations. And in the meantime, we're facing almost like this wrinkle in time, is the way we think of it. But it's almost like it's gone to hyperspeed overnight, in many industries. And so now the question is, how do they close that gap? But while at the main time thinking of security and making sure that that they don't get burned, right? That they don't get in a lot of trouble from a legal perspective, from all kinds of perspectives you can possibly think of. So how is security a catalyst for the people in these groups, and where they're really having to act fast, but they have to do it in a manner where they have to still think about their stateful systems, because most of them have that, but they just can't create it overnight. So I'm really fascinated to hear from your perspective on this particular group and how security can be a catalyst for them as they move further to the left.
It sounds almost like you're asking for resources on COBOL security right now. I guess that's really the tricky part with security, right? Like people will not see it as a viable option to invest because, amazing security is not always visible. And so, until that time where you get, breached or issues, you don't see it as something important. And I guess that's the tricky part with security. But I think, if I had to imagine some of the things that, they would do, I think for some of these organizations, what I would do is go on like a bug bounty system, like a security bug bounty, and just open a program because you created a system for like who know how long years. You're not gonna there's not gonna be any magic wand now to wave off and say let's make sure that now everything is crystal clear, amazing security baked in. That's not going to happen, but you can do some like proactive things on your end, which is have a security team around. Like if you haven't done that before, it seems like that organization did not have security as the top of its mind. Have a security contact, have a security team, have someone being able to like get those security reports from individuals and process them. Go off, create also like a bug bounty program for security to make sure that, hackers, white hat hackers can go find issues, report them safely and securely, and you'll have time to remediate it as well. So I think both of these tools are like good low hanging fruits for like those kind of organizations to at least, hit the ground running in a sense.
And to add to that, and my thoughts on it are basically, continuous surveillance, right? Like right now, having systems, security systems that are actually watching, surveilling, detecting changes, right? And also having a good understanding of how you're going to manage your incidents, because at the end of the day, we're all going to get exposed at some point, right? Compromised. And I learned over time working in the federal government that it's not how you protect the system, it's how you react to it, right? So tons of auditing, make sure that you have the ability to log everything that's happened, and then also have the ability to sift through that data and figure out the important bits, right? One of the ways I see it happening already. I mean, Snyk, again, it's just happening because I've noticed they have services, right? So like when I run, it's again, I hate to go left again on you, but when you're running as a developer and you implement a tool like Snyk on the back end, right, they're storing that data and they have a monitoring service. So I get an email every day telling me, hey, you still have a package that has been identified as vulnerable in this stack, and they're reading, right, the maybe the package JSON file, whatever, if you're using a Node app, and they're alerting you, right? So that's a great, I would say, catalyst for those folks that we're talking about on the far right, implementing those kind of services and tools that are constantly monitoring and giving you status, right? So if you have that on, you may get that alert fatigue that Liran was talking about earlier, but on the same token, a security professional won't be, right? They're going to be looking at that and they're going to be bugging the developers, the ops teams, whoever's involved for like, hey, why is this happening? And this can't go on any longer, right? We're open here. So, again, for me, I think for the folks on the far right, they should definitely look into tooling to keep a constant surveillance of what's going on in their systems. And I'm talking, from scratch, so source code all the way through that process. And then also focus on, mitigation strategies and incident response and those kind of tactics, right? Strategies, because that's how you're actually going to defeat the hacker. They may get you for a little bit, but if you have good surveillance, you'll be able to detect what's going on, figure it out, and then shut them down, and then go back and do your postmortems in a really, really detailed way, right, to figure out how that happened and then try to prevent that.
Then the question I have is, then how can you make that? Hey Ray, how can you make that a way to be a catalyst for DevOps? Then, Liran, I mean, how do these practices, help enable DevOps?
So I think anything that would be able to get automated would end up being that, and so that's why we're seeing all of those tools being embedded in fire off a circle build, and security is baked in.
Great. Hey, Ray.
Hey guys, well, we had some fantastic commentary in the Slack and on Twitter. We heard from the COBOL enthusiasm community, first and foremost, who is
RPG all the way, baby.
Who wants to remind you that there is COBOL active development. There's even capture the flags going on involving COBOL. So it's not just unemployment systems in Northeast.
There's a good Reddit thread on that as well.
We also heard from that Angel. Your fans certainly appreciate the optimism that we can actually defeat the hackers. That's a fantastic message to hear at midnight Eastern. That we can win. That we can win that battle.
We got this.
But mostly we heard from a lot of folks that basically really appreciated the interaction and the discussion. And we would really like to thank you guys for staying up with us and for keeping everyone else so intrigued by a fantastic panel discussion. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you.
A lot of fun. Thank you all.
Same here. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
And for those of you that are still watching On the Talks online, we are